Wang Guian. It is said that Wang Shi, whose courtesy name is Guian, is a descendant of an aristocratic family in Daming Mansion, Hebei Province. One year, he traveled to the south of the Yangtze River and stopped his boat on the bank of the Yangtze River. There is a boatman girl on the boat nearby. She is very beautiful. She is sitting on the bow of the boat, lowering her head and embroidering shoes. Wang Guian looked at her for a long time, but the woman didn't seem to notice. Wang Guian then recited Wang Wei's poem Luoyang's daughter lives opposite the door loudly, deliberately letting her hear it. The woman seemed to understand that it was recited for her, but she only raised her head slightly, glanced at it, and then lowered her head to embroider. Wang Guian became even more emotional and threw a piece of gold forgetfully, and it happened to fall on the woman's lapel. The woman still didn't look up, picked it up, and threw it on the shore. Wang Guian had no choice but to pick up the gold. He took out another pair of gold bracelets and threw them over, landing next to the woman's feet. The woman continued to embroider her shoes and ignored them. After a while, the boatman came back from outside. Wang Guian was afraid that he would find the gold bracelet, and he was scratching his head anxiously. However, he saw the woman calmly hooking the gold bracelet with her feet and covering it up. After the boatman got on the boat, he urged the woman to pack up her work, while he untied the mooring rope and sailed down the river. Wang Guian looked at the sailing shadow in the distance and sat there blankly, feeling very melancholy. At that time, he had just lost his wife and regretted not immediately asking a matchmaker to arrange a marriage with the boatman. When I asked around on the boats, I didn't even know the name of the boatman just now. Wang Guian quickly asked the stern of his boat to catch the boat, but there was no trace of the boat. As a last resort, Wang Guian had to cross the river to do business. When I returned to the north, I checked along the river again, but there was still no news. After returning home, whether eating or sleeping, I could not forget the beautiful figure of the boatman girl. The next year, Wang Guian went to the south again and bought a boat. He lived by the river and watched the ships coming and going every day. In half a year, I became familiar with all the boats in this area, but there was no sign of the boat from last year. And the money bag in my waist gradually became empty, so I had no choice but to go home again. This time, Wang Guian missed her even more urgently. No matter when he was walking during the day or dreaming at night, the shadow of the beautiful boat girl always floated in his mind. One night, Wang Guian had a dream. He suddenly arrived in a small village by the river. As soon as he passed through several doors, he saw a chai door open to the south. The sparse bamboos in the courtyard were woven into fences, and the flowers and trees were luxuriant, like a pavilion. Garden, Wang Guian went straight in, and suddenly saw a tall Albizia julibrisson tree not far away. The tree was full of red silk hanging down, and its dense shade was attractive. He couldn't help but recite silently the poem A Tree of Lantana Flowers in front of the door. Written by Yu Ji in the Yuan dynasty probably describes this kind of scenery, right? After walking a few more steps, a small, smooth and simple courtyard suddenly appeared in front of me, surrounded by a reed fence. There were 3 rooms in the north of the courtyard, and the doors were closed. Looking back, I saw a small room by the south wall, with a red banana plant in front of the window. Wang Guian leaned forward and took a peek, and saw a clothes rack with a colorful skirt hanging on the door. Knowing that it was a woman's boudoir, she hurriedly retreated. But the people in the room seemed to have noticed that someone was coming, so they came out to welcome her. Wang Guian took a look and saw that the pretty face was that of the boatman girl from last year. Wang Guian was overjoyed. He shouted, "Isn't it possible that we will meet one day?" The two were about to get intimate when the woman's father suddenly came back. Wang Guian was startled and woke up, only to realize that it was a dream. Recall the sceneries in the dream as vividly as if they were before your eyes. Wang Guian kept this sweet dream in her heart, fearing that telling others would destroy this beautiful idea. More than a year later, Wang Guian went to Zhenjiang, Zhongnan again. In the south of the city, Mrs. Zhu, a family friend of the Wang family, invited Wang Guian to have a drink. On the way to a banquet, Wang Guian lost his way and entered a small village by mistake. Suddenly, he felt that the scenery in the village seemed to have been seen somewhere before. In the gate of a courtyard, there is a tall acacia tree. which is like a scene I have seen in a dream. He was so pleasantly surprised that he dismounted and rushed in. The scenery in the courtyard is indeed no different from a sweet dream. Walking further into the courtyard, the layout of the buildings is also consistent. Since the dream came true, Wang Guian no longer hesitated and went straight to the small south room in the backyard. As expected, the boatman's daughter was in the room. She was startled when she saw Wang Guian coming in from a distance. She quickly stood up and covered herself with the door leaf, yelling, "Where did this man come from?" Wang Guian was neither advancing nor retreating. He seemed to be still in his dream. When the woman saw that he was already standing by the door, she closed the door with a bang. Wang Guian shouted anxiously, "Don't you remember the person who threw the bracelet?" Then he confided in him the pain of love sickness in the past few years and told the omen in his dream. The woman asked Wang Guian about his family background through the window, and Wang Guian told her the truth. The woman said, "Since you are an eunuch, you already have a beautiful wife at home. Why do you want me to go there?" Wang Guian said anxiously, "If it wasn't because I miss you, I would have married a long time ago." The woman said, "If it is like what you said, it shows your sincerity. Although it is difficult for me to express my feelings to my parents, I have already rejected several marriage offers against my orders. I still keep that pair of gold bracelets, and I expect to fall in love with them. Eventually the news will come. Unfortunately today, my parents have gone to Grandma's house and are about to come back. You can go back for the time being and then ask a matchmaker to come and formally propose the marriage. I think you will get what you want. But if you want to get married in an indecent manner, then you made the wrong calculation." Just as Wang Guian was about to leave in a hurry, the woman looked at his back and shouted from a distance, "Wang Lang. My name is Yan Niang, my surname is Meng, and my father's first cousin is Zhang Li. Don't forget it." Wang Guian promised to remember it. While running out of the courtyard, Wang Guian went to Zhu Teifu's house for a banquet, because he had something on his mind. He ended the banquet early, said goodbye, came back, and hurried to the small village to meet Meng Jiangli. Meng Jiangli received Wang Guian politely and set up tables and stools by the fence in the courtyard to invite him to sit down. After Wang Guian thanked him, he first introduced himself, then explained his purpose of coming, and respectfully presented 100 taels of silver as a betrothal gift. Unexpectedly, the old man waved his hand and said, "I'm sorry, my daughter is already betrothed to someone else." Wang Guian shouted anxiously, "I have inquired for sure. It is obvious that we are still waiting for employment. Why did you refuse like this?" Old man Zhang Li said calmly, "What I just said is completely true. I don't dare to tell the truth." Lie. After Wang Guian heard this, he immediately lost his mind and left dejectedly. Wang Guian returned to his residence and thought about it, but he had nowhere to find a matchmaker. I tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. Looking back at Mrs. Zhu's house, I originally wanted to tell him about this, but I was afraid that he would laugh at me for marrying a boatman's daughter, so I didn't have the nerve to say it. Now I have no choice but to do so. I had to go and beg him, so as soon as it dawned, I ran to the servant's house and told him the situation. The servant smiled and said, "That's it, don't worry, I still have something to do with this old man. He is my grandmother's great-nephew. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Wang Guian then plucked up the courage to talk, the hidden secrets that have been hidden in my heart for several years. When the servant heard this, he was surprised and said, "Zhang Li is a poor farmer and has never punted boats as a profession. Are you mistaken?" So he sent his son Daling to Meng's house to inquire. Old man Zhang Li explained, "Although my family is poor, we are definitely not people who sell marriages. Yesterday, the prince used gold and silver as a matchmaker. I think he probably thought that we poor people were greedy for money and acted upon profit, so they did not dare to reach this high level. It's a marriage matter. Since you came here today, it's my servant's intention, so it must be right. But my daughter is very willful and spoiled, and she often refuses good people if they don't suit her wishes. I have to discuss it with her to avoid any complaints in the future." With that said, he got up and walked into the inner room. After a while, he came out, cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Now you can do as the servant wants." So the two agreed on an auspicious day. Daling said goodbye and went home, reporting the good news to the servant. Wang Guian arranged a generous dowry, went to Meng's house to pay the bride price, and borrowed the house of Mrs. Zhu's family to hold the wedding. After staying for 3 days after the wedding, Wang Guian took Yan Niying to bid farewell to his father-in-law and returned north. On the way, they stayed on the boat at night, and the newlyweds chatted. Wang Guian asked Yan Niying, "I met you in this area that year. At that time, I suspected that you didn't look like a boat girl. Where were you going by boat?" Yan Niying said, "My uncle's home is in Jiangbai. That was when we borrowed a boat to visit him. Although my family is poor, with only enough food and clothing, and no savings, we are not greedy for this kind of unexpected wealth. I laughed at you. Your eyes were round at that time, and you kept saying it again and again. I want to use money to impress people. When I hear you reciting ancient poems, I know that you are an elegant scholar, but I also suspect that you are a frivolous kid who treats her as a slut. Ha, if my father finds out about your gold bracelet, you will die. There is no burial place. Do you think I love money so much?" Wang Guian laughed and said, "Although you are smart, you still fell into my trap." Yan Niying was taken aback and asked hurriedly, "Why, what's going on?" Wang Guian deliberately stopped and smiled without saying anything. Yan Niying kept asking, and Wang Guian said, "We are getting closer to home every day, and I can no longer hide this from you. To tell you the truth, I have a wife at home, and she is the daughter of Wu Shengshu." Yan Niying didn't believe it, so Wang Guian deliberately said it again solemnly. After hearing this, Yan Niying suddenly stood up and ran out of the cabin without saying a word. Wang Guian hurriedly dragged his shoes out, but Yan Niying had already jumped into the river. Wang Guian shouted for help, and there was a commotion among the surrounding ships. However, the night on the river is vast and the stars are dotted. "Where can I find the shadow of Yan Niying?" Wang Guian cried loudly, heartbroken, in pain, and regretful. He paid a high price to hire sailors along the river to salvage Yan Niying's body, but there was no trace of it. In the end, I had no choice but to return to my home in Damingfu, feeling sad and worried. I was afraid that my father-in-law would come to visit my daughter. How should I explain it at that time? It happened that his brother-in-law was an official in Henan, so Wang Guian lived there for more than a year before returning. Encountering heavy rain on the way back, Wang Guian went to a farmhouse in the village to take shelter from the rain. He saw that the house in the courtyard was clean and tidy, and an old lady was playing with a baby under the building. When the baby saw Wang Guian coming in, he rushed over and asked him to hold him. Wang Guian felt a little strange, and seeing that the baby looked delicate and cute, he took it over and put it on his lap. Even if the old lady calls him, he won't go. After a while, the rain cleared and the sky cleared. Wang Guian lifted the little guy and handed it to the old lady. He walked down the hall and asked the servants to get ready and set off. Unexpectedly, the baby started crying and shouting, "Daddy is gone!" The old lady laughed at the child calling a stranger his father, and quickly scolded him to stop, picked him up, and went back indoors. Wang Guian was waiting for his servants to pack his clothes when he suddenly saw a beautiful young woman walking out from behind the indoor screen with the baby in her arms. The more Wang Guian looked at her, the more she looked like Yan Niying. Just as she was wondering, Yan Niying had already started scolding her. "You heartless man! What will you do with this piece of meat you left behind?" Only then did Wang Guian realize that this baby was his son. Couldn't help feeling sad, and didn't have time to ask them how mother and son got here, so she explained the original joke first. And then Yan Niying turned her anger into joy, and the two of them shed tears at each other. Then Yan Niying told what happened. The owner of the family, Mo Wang, was childless in his 60s. "I took my wife to Puchua Temple in Anhai, Zhejiang to offer incense. When the boat stopped at the bank of the Yangtze River on the way back, Yan Niying happened to be going down the river and happened to hit the side of Mo Wang's boat. Mo Wang hurriedly asked people to fish her out, and after rescuing her for a night, Yan Niying regained consciousness. When Mo Wang saw that Yan Niying was a girl from a good family, he happily recognized her as his goddaughter and took her home. After a few months, Yan Niying wanted to find a husband for her, but Yan Niang expressed her unwillingness to remarry. At 10 months, Yan Niang gave birth to a boy named Zisheng. By chance, Wang Guiyang came to this house to take shelter from the rain. By this time, the parasite was almost 1 year old. Wang Guiyang was overjoyed after hearing this, so he unloaded the car again, went into the house to meet the old man and the old lady, and also addressed him as father-in-law and mother-in-law. After staying for a few days, the couple returned to Daming Mansion with their son and Mr. and Mrs. Mo. As soon as they entered the house, Meng Wang had been waiting for Wang's house for 2 months. When Meng Wang first arrived, the Wang family members were in a daze, which made Meng Wang feel strange. Now that they met, the truth was revealed, and everyone became happy. Meng Wang realized that the previous hesitation was for a reason.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.